Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this evening, wherever you're watching from. I didn't get to announce a lot of your cities, but we appreciate wherever it is you're watching from. And we appreciate you being here. I am Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., I welcome you to tonight's program. A special welcome as well as a thank you to Peter Baker and Larry Mantle. Thank you both for making yourselves available to our America at a Crossroads audience. We are all very appreciative. Next week, we have a double header. We have two programs, one on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. On Tuesday, June 27th, join us as Larry Mantle interviews our own Zev Yaroslavsky about his recently published and released memoir, From Boyle Heights to the Halls of Power. The book provides astounding insights about their inner workings of big city government and is relevant far beyond Zev's home city, which is Los Angeles. We hope you will join us as one of the leaders of Judge, and this America at a Crossroads series provides insights gleaned from a life of extraordinary civic and public service. The following day, on Wednesday, June 28th, we welcome one of the country's most respected political analysts, Ron Brownstein, who will set the stage for our 2024 election countdown. Yes, we're there again. Ron will take a look at the political landscape 16 months out and give us his best analysis of what is happening and what to expect in the coming months. We'll fasten our seatbelts for that one. He will be in dialogue with the always wonderful Pat Morrison. Thanks to our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine, former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky, David Lair, Caroline Kelly, and Rabbi Ken Chazen. Remember, we have absolutely no control over Eventbrite's registration process, but if you need help, email me. Just respond to any email you get from either David or me, and one of us will be sure that you get registered and you will get the Zoom link. You know, we respond to anybody who emails us, so don't worry about that. But do know that if you unsubscribe, you cannot get any emails. So don't push an unsubscribe button unless you're prepared not to get the Zoom link to join us. Now for a couple more announcements, my friend and colleague, David Lair. David?
Thank you, Janice, and welcome everyone to summer 2023. When we began these programs in the early spring of 2020, we had no idea that America at a Crossroads would become a weekly ritual for us and thousands of you across the country and overseas. But it has, and we are thrilled at the reach and impact of these webinars. Tonight, we're fortunate to have back with us a leading reporter and analyst of the presidency who's been covering the White House and its occupants for decades, the New York Times' Peter Baker. He is always terrific. On July 5th, after the couple programs that Janice just mentioned, we welcome back Rick Hasen, one of the nation's leading experts on election law and threats to the electoral process. Given the recent unexpected decision of the U.S. Supreme Court on an important redistricting case, that case and other still pending decisions dealing with election law will give him lots to talk about with the LA Times' Pat Morrison. The following week, on July 12th, we'll host Isabel Kirshner, the New York Times Jerusalem correspondent and author of the just-released book, The Land of Hope and Fear, Israel's Battle for its Inner Soul. It's been described as a wonderful tale. In subsequent weeks, we'll hear from political practitioners and mavens Bob Shrum and Mike Murphy, and the New York Times provocative columnist Michelle Goldberg. There's lots ahead. Our moderator tonight is the incomparable Larry Mantle. He's the host of the flagship broadcast of NPR station LAist, formerly KPCC, which he has hosted since 1985. He's the winner of countless awards and has hosted over 30 of our America at a Crossroads programs. He's a master at his craft. Larry?
David, thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words, and it's wonderful to be back again. Thank you, Janice, Mel, and Zev. Such a pleasure to be part of America at a Crossroads and these important weekly programs. It's great to have back with us New York Times Chief White House correspondent Peter Baker. He's had an extraordinary career covering Presidents Clinton through Biden, first with the Washington Post, where he reported for 20 years, then with the New York Times. But he and Susan's son, Theo, undoubtedly has the most auspicious career start. Theo recently received the prestigious George W. Polk Award for his investigative reporting on allegations that manipulated images were used in some research papers co-authored by Stanford President Mark Tessier-Levine. Theo did the reporting for the Stanford Daily student newspaper He's 18 and the youngest ever Polk recipient. Back to his father, in addition to Peter's many years covering the White House, he spent 4 years as Moscow co-bureau chief and has a lot to say about Russia under Vladimir Putin. Peter, great to have you with us again. Please share your parental feelings about your son's work.
Larry, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I appreciate your mentioning that. And thank you to Janice and David and Levin, Mel, and the whole crew there for having me back. It's always a great delight. You guys have the best, you're the best webinar program I know in the country right now. You get the best audiences and the best hosts, and I'm delighted to be with you. And you're right. It's funny that a lot of titles over the years, but my favorite title is Theo Baker's dad. Absolutely. He is, he always told us he would never, ever be a reporter. And then he called one day from his freshman year of college and said, I think I'm going to work for the student paper for a little bit. And then he called a few weeks later and said, I'm going to write an investigation of the university president. I'm like, oh, could you start with a professor or something? But he's done a remarkable job, and he has already outpaced his mom and dad, and we couldn't be prouder of him.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, let's to get to your very long-standing gig as the chief White House reporter, and I'm just curious, as a professional matter, what keeps you engaged and interested in that beat for so many years?
Well, it's a good question, and I ask myself that almost every day. I have been doing it since, off and on, at least since 1996, with a 4-year break in Moscow. But you know what? It's always changing. I thought in some points it would be, repetitive, and there are some things that are very much alike. We're going to have a state dinner tomorrow. I've covered a lot of those, and a lot of the issues and the dynamics are similar that we've seen in the past. But somehow something always comes along to surprise you. And obviously, Trump particularly surprised everybody, I think, in so many different ways every day he was in office. But even today, I don't think you can say it's a boring job. There's so many things going on. We're at war with Russia in effect in Ukraine right now. We've got this competition with China going on. We've got our domestic issues where we're not really certain about the future of democracy. So, if you can't find something interesting to write and all of that, you're not paying attention.
No, so true. And we want to invite, of course, viewers to ask questions for Peter about any of the subject areas. We're going to get into a lot of them tonight, but any of them on which he would be writing or commenting, you can do that, of course, in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Please put your question there. And we also ask if you'd include your first name and your location. Just kind of nice to share with others where you're viewing the program from along with your question. Peter, what are some of the biggest differences in covering these personalities? You spend, so much time writing about them, often in their presence, doing interviews or more casual contact over the years. And these are all, big and very different personalities. So does that change how you cover it a lot, the specific personality of a president?
Yeah, and that's a lot of my focus, is to try to, I'm really fascinated by people with power, how they acquire it, how they exercise it, how they preserve it, for good or bad. And I think that's sort of the fundamental mission of a White House reporter. Obviously, we cover specific policy issues all the time. What's the best approach to Social Security or crime or the federal debt or whatever. But to me, the most interesting story is the narrative, tales of these people who get to the White House, how they got there, what they do when they get there. And each of them there are some similarities, right? I mean, to be a president, to get to that White House, you had to, for one thing, have a phenomenal ego, because you have to be able to look in the mirror and say, I'm better at this than 330 million other Americans out there, which takes quite a lot. And you have to be able to withstand the rigors and the torment of our political system, which is not an easy thing these days. And I think so in some ways there are some similarities you can see between them. But then each of them has his own or her own, eventually we'll get to her own, character and instincts and the way they approach things. Clinton was this fascinating mix of, Southern aw shucks charm and Rhodes Scholar, intellect and untamed appetites that would get him in trouble, right? Bush obviously had comes from this background of privilege and the desire to compete with, even as he tries to satisfy and make his father proud. He was misunderestimated, as he liked to say. Smarter than a lot of people gave him credit for, but made a lot of very big decisions that people are still living with and debating today. I mean, Obama, probably the most introverted of the presidents that I've ever met. Really an interesting character in that sense. He needed time after an event in the East Room. They would build time in his schedule for him to kind of recharge his batteries, because it would take something out of him to be with all these people, even though he was so phenomenally able to take a stadium full of 70,000 people and get them all ginned up. He was still kind of, I think, a really, a person who lived his own internal life. Trump is Trump. I mean, we've all, it's hard. He's the outlier in every circumstance, in every club that he's ever been in. He is, we could talk forever about him. And then you got Biden, who, the career Paul, right? He's been doing this for 50 some years. We've never had a president who spent as much time in office as Joe Biden has. And finally, after, his third run for the presidency, he gets there, only to find that he's, facing these extraordinary challenges at home and abroad. And he's a character too, and he's struggling with his own challenges. We saw just yesterday his son pleading guilty to a couple tax misdemeanors. So they're each interesting, and they all go through these really interesting challenges. And I really find that fascinating.
One of the things, going back to Obama, and again, you're so much closer than I am, but I just found interesting the first time that I met then Senator Obama, and spent almost an hour talking with him, partly on the air and part afterwards off, he seemed so smart and professorial to me, and he didn't even come off to me that much like a senator, even though, because he was a fresh senator at that point. And it was really interesting to see over time the kind of gravitas that senators have and of course presidents have, that evolved with Barack Obama over the years. I was wondering if that's something that you found interesting to observe too.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, he's a very bright guy. He's brilliant in his own way, and you can have a really smart intellectual conversation with him. He doesn't like politics, which of course is a funny thing for somebody whose job it is to be a politician, right? I mean, he just didn't care for it. The whole idea of backslapping and, stroking the members to get the vote and to have dinner with them and to call them on their mother's birthday or whatever. He thought that was kind of fake, in his mind. If the policy is smart, you should agree with me and you should vote for me, and it should be as simple as that. Now, I'm not saying he was naive. He obviously wasn't naive, but he just resisted the whole culture of Washington, much to the chagrin of some of his aides who wished he would do a little bit more of that. He would have, his aides would convince him, why don't you have dinner with some Republicans? And so he would have dinner with the Republicans. Not that he was happy about it. And then afterwards, some of the Republicans would vote against him, and he would say, well, see, why did I do that? And he didn't understand that, you're not going to win them over on every vote, but you are going to build relationships that could be useful over time. But he just didn't enjoy that. He had a joke once at one of these White House dinners I thought was very revealing. He said, everybody says I should have a drink with Mitch McConnell. He says, why don't you have a drink with Mitch McConnell? He just disdained that whole idea of the backslapping Washington. And he was successful in a lot of things, obviously, but that probably held him back on some other things he might have liked to have gotten done.
And then we think of Joe Biden as exactly the opposite of that, a man who really loves that whole back and forth with other politicians. What did you suffer any whiplash when the transition from Trump to Biden occurred? A White House that was so, as you said, an outlier under former President Trump, and then it returned to more typical business in the White House with the Biden administration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Trump, again, as you say, an outlier. It's not a partisan thing. It's not a Republican Democrat thing. The Biden White House would resemble a pretty conventional Republican White House in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean they'll make the same decisions. Obviously, they have different politics and ideologies. But in terms of the standards that they adopted, the norms that they adhered to, the way they run their operation, it was all much more familiar to anybody who spent time in a White House. The Trump White House was anything goes at any time kind of operation. Nothing you thought you knew about a White House applied. The rules were just thrown out the window. Now, that's what was part of his appeal, right? To a lot of his voters, they liked the fact that he was a China and the bull in the China shop, for mangling my terrible cliche. and he was willing to bust things up. Of course, that didn't always go well when some of the things he was busting up were rules and laws that are intended to constrain a president for various reasons. But there's nothing that you couldn't tell him this is the way things are done around here and expect that he would then follow that. Whereas Biden, of course, as you say, that he is a born lifelong Paul, and he understands the rules, the guidelines, the limits, and the way things are done. And he respects them and appreciates them. That doesn't mean every president doesn't push the boundary sometimes of their power or their executive authority. They do, but they live within certain 40-yard lines, and Trump didn't live within any of them.
News media found it so difficult to cover the Trump administration. What for you was the biggest challenge covering him?
Well, I think the important challenge was to avoid the trap of becoming opposition, right? He would call us enemies of the people. He would say we were fake news. He would do whatever he could to insult us. I remember him shouting at me on Air Force one time, and he's trying to push us, right? He's trying to make us the opposition because that's to his benefit. He once told Leslie Stahl, who asked him, why do you always just beat up on reporters all the time? He says, because I want to discredit you so that when you report something I don't like, people won't believe you. And that was a strategy on his part. And the trick was not to fall into the trap of becoming the opposition. Now, it's our job as an independent institution, the media, to call him on things he does that are, not true or what have you, and to be vigorous and aggressive in our reporting. But there's a difference between being aggressive, independent reporters and being in the opposition. And that was a fine line that we had to work for. Marty Barron, I thought, put it well. He was the executive editor of the Washington Post. He says, we're not at war, we're at work. And I thought that was a good way to put it.
Well, and it requires tremendous journalistic discipline. And can you elaborate a bit on that in a way that perhaps you haven't been called on previously? Obviously, you have your way of going about things that fits your standards and that of your paper. But with Trump, even more discipline, I would think, was required.
Yeah, because again, you don't want to take the bait, right? He wants you to, to be against him, and that's not our job. It's our job to be fair and to be, even-handed and to be dispassionate. But that doesn't mean, which a lot of critics say, that we are somehow creating false equivalences. No, we shouldn't do that. That's not good journalism either. There's no such thing as a false equivalent. Our job is to look for the truth, look for facts, help our readers make sense of things, put them in context without drifting over the line into actual opinion. And I think that a well-reported story can make very clear when a president has said something that's not true or is going off on a path that is perhaps dangerous to the country. We can do that through fact-based reporting without having to become commentators, opinion.
You don't have to call him a liar. You point out the things that are
not true.
They're not truthful, right?
We had that debate all the time, Larry. We had that debate at the New York Times all the time. When do we use the L word? That's what we call it, the L word, because it's not in our nature as reporters to call names, right? And the L word, to say somebody is a liar or has lied, implies, first of all, that we know what they're thinking, and second of all, has a way of sounding like you're, scolding rather than reporting. So
I also think it's a bit insulting to the audience because, readers or viewers or listeners can determine for themselves. If you say, here's what the president at the time is saying, here's what the actual facts indicate, then, you don't have to paint by numbers for your consumers.
And we would say flatly, what he is saying is false if in fact it was false. We didn't shy away from that. We didn't pretend that something that was said that was factually untrue was just somebody's opinion. That's not what we did. But we were careful about the L word because we don't want to look like the word the opposition. We did use it when we thought it was appropriate, occasionally, sparingly, conservatively, because then it had power when you did use it, right? We eventually, my executive editor, Dean Baquet, at one point decided that we would use the L word when it came to the whole birther nonsense about Barack Obama. Zero facts behind it. He said it again and again, even though he knew there were no facts. So at some point, my editors decided, okay, it's okay to call that a lie. That is a lie because he knows it's not true. So we did on occasion use that word. We didn't shy away from what we thought was appropriate, but we weren't going to use it every single day on every single falsehood because then it becomes cheapened and devalued.
Well, and if you have a corroborated account of a political official saying something different, and then speaking to their supporters, saying something that they've already indicated they didn't really believe, that's pretty clear.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, stick to what you know and tell it as powerfully and as straightforwardly as you can. And that will be what the readers need, I think.
The presidential press conference seem almost quaint now, a thing of the past. President Trump went directly to his supporters through Twitter, of course. President Biden hasn't had many news conferences, and he's a guy who loves to talk and hasn't even had a lot of news conference. So do you think this is just the new normal? Or do you think if presidents did have more news conferences, that there would be a service there to the public? We used to have quite a few, as I recall, with former President Obama. What are we missing?
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, I'm a fan of news conferences. I think there's something important in a democracy when a president is challenged by people who don't work for him, who are not his supporters, who are not his friends, who are not his allies, who are not trying to butter him up and flatter him and tell him what he wants to hear, who ask him hard questions on subjects he may or may not want to answer. And in our democratic society, it's really the only time that can happen with a president who has such extraordinary amounts of power. So I think that's important, just, for accountability, for a president to subject himself or herself eventually to reporters' questions, even if they don't like it, because I think there's something very healthy about that. By the way, who thought that too? Dwight Eisenhower thought that. He made a point of having regular press conferences, probably more than any other president, I think, because he thought it was not only a matter of democratic accountability, but also an action forcing tradition, because it made him think ahead of time what he was going to be asked and make sure he was asking his people, where are we at on this? How are we doing on that? It was therefore, in his view, a smart way to manage the government at the same time. So there's value to a president as well as to, I think, the public in our society.
What sorts of conversations have you had within the Times, or even as you personally consider, how to cover President Biden's age? Because he was gaffe prone, even as a young man, yet there are things that he'll say from time to time today that one wonders if it's age related and maybe a memory issue. And this is relevant, of course, with him running for re-election to the presidency. But at the same time, you don't want to treat him to a different standard because he is older and attributing gaps or missteps to age when they may not be age related. So how do you walk that line?
Yeah. So when President Biden has what we think of as a senior moment, it may just be the same thing as he used to have as a junior moment, right? Because you're right. He is a gaffe machine. That was a phrase he himself used once about himself. And some of those things, still happen today. For him, the challenge, of course, is that just because of his age, they're going to be attributed to age, whether they are, in fact, things he might have said 20 years ago, 30 years ago, or not. And then there are things that are clearly age, right? He does shuffle when he walks now. His voice is softer and harder to command the room than it used to be. He clearly does have some memory issues from time to time. He confuses names or he forgets names or what have you. So, we've all either have been that age or going to be that age or have fathers or mothers that age. We all know that this is just the way life works. So yeah, we have written some pretty tough stories, I think, about this. They don't like our stories. The president, in fact, jabbed the New York Times specifically at the White House Correspondents' Dinner a few weeks back, saying that the only people who really cared about his age was the New York Times, which I don't think is true. But I think it's actually a legitimate and important topic for us to cover, because we are talking about not just the oldest president of the United States, but somebody who's asking us to give him power of the presidency all the way until age 86. Right. That's well beyond where Reagan was. And we know, of course, that, by the time Reagan was 86, he was pretty deep into Alzheimer's. So 86 is an uncharted territory for the presidency. Now, I know in California, obviously, this issue has come up with Senator Feinstein. At what point does age become, a factor when you think about stepping down? But there's a real big difference between a senator and a president, I would argue. I think that being a senator, if you're of a certain age and you're having some troubles, well, that may not be ideal. But if you're president of the United States and we're in the middle of a shooting war, in effect, in Ukraine, where our weapons are being used for, by our allies to fight against the Russians, and we have at least some threat of possible nuclear escalation, you want a president who's going to be up there and pretty sharp. Now,
Well, and the other thing is that what Senator Feinstein is dealing with are quite serious health complications, and her ability to show up for votes, I think, has been quite compromised. President Biden is still doing his work, working in the White House. But I do want to go back to those.
and I know I should add, Larry, just to be clear, the people we talk to who work with him every day, they are insistent that he is as sharp as ever. The phrase they almost all use, almost as if they handed it out, as sharp as a tack. And they say, look, judge him by the results, judge him by the legislation he's passed, judge him by his handling of the Ukraine war, judge him as he has performed the duties of the job. And they point out that former President Trump is only 3 years younger right now. He's 77, and he's had his own cognitive questions as well. So putting all that in there, let's make sure for context. But you're right. I think it's a legitimate issue to ask, is this, and clearly the voters think so, because that's what polls show, including many Democrats.
Well, and there are, going back to the young Joe and the gaps, often those seem to me to be ones where his edit switch didn't quite work, and he said something that maybe you don't want to, that's not politically the wisest thing to say, but it didn't really come out of a confusion between people or confusion on issues. Now the gaps seem to be more in that latter category where he's a little unclear. It's not that he just doesn't have the edit switch. And so, that's got to be a challenge, I think, for you as to how you contextualize that.
Right, exactly. I think it's important to put in the full context. It's important to look clear-eyed at his conduct and behavior and how he's handling things. And it is important to make sure we do, recognize the results of how he's performing. And I think that's a fair point. He has, when he has confusion or momentary lapses of memory in public, again, my dad certainly did at that age. But he also catches himself usually pretty quickly. When he can't remember a name or he gets something wrong, he often catches himself, well, I didn't meant this or that or the other thing. But not always. I mean, and you're right, it's hard to distinguish between things that are just unwise to say or versus age related. Last night in California, right, at a fundraiser, he called Xi Jinping a dictator and said that Xi Jinping was kept uninformed about that spy balloon. Well, that was probably diplomatically maybe not the best timing, since the Secretary of State had just met with Xi Jinping the day before. But that's something Biden would have done 10 years ago or 20 years ago. That's clearly, I would say, that's clearly not an age thing.
And I was just, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, let's go ahead.
I was just going to ask Peter, I was just going to raise that issue because Secretary of State Blinken, of course, just in China over the weekend and reiterated what is U.S. policy, that Taiwan is not independent of China. But again, we had President Biden in that 60 Minutes interview back in the fall say that, well, Taiwan really is, they should be the determiners of their own status. And then we have the statement about Xi being a dictator at the fundraiser. And so is this indicative of softening of U.S. position or inconsistency, or what do you make of that?
Well, I think this is a tough challenge for any American president right now, is what do you do about China? There is, ironically, something of a bipartisan agreement, more or less, on this. He and Biden and Trump are not that different when it comes to China. Biden didn't lift the tariffs on China that Trump put down. He has, in fact, been tough on China in some things, but at the same time, he wants to have dialogue. Again, so did President Trump. And he had hoped for a thaw. That was the word he used in the coming months, and maybe even to meet with President Xi before the end of the year. But you're right, his comments on Taiwan, that his staff has to keep walking back. He keeps making them again and again. So you have to take him at his own word. If he's going to keep saying it, even after his staff walks it back, you ought to take seriously what he's saying, because I think that suggests he means it. I don't think that's age related. I think that's policy related. He doesn't buy into the policy that his own administration, in theory, stands for, and he keeps telling us that. So I think that they're working their way through that. But they would like to lower the temperature right now with China a little bit to try to keep things from getting too far out of control, especially as they're focused on Russia and Europe.
Let's talk about President Trump and his indictments. The judge in the case has scheduled the case to start as soon as August. It's hard to believe the president's attorneys will, be willing to do that and feel prepared. But how do you see this playing out in the presidential race?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, first of all, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you too much of a legal thing. I agree with you. It's hard to imagine the trial starting in August, but it's kind of an opening bid. It's her way of saying, we're not going to let this be delayed infinitely. And so if we're going to try some pre-motion things, let's get going with them and do them now and get them out of the way. That does suggest that it's possible that there could be a trial potentially before the election. That's a huge thing. We have another trial in New York scheduled for March. There's another trial people don't really know about in the fall, a civil trial, in which President Trump is being accused of financial wrongdoing by the New York State Attorney General. And he, of course, just got out of trial in a civil case that found him liable for sexual abuse. And of course, there are at least two other possible indictments that may be, coming his way, one from the Georgia Fulton County prosecutor and one again from Jack Smith on January 6th in the effort to overturn the election. There's a lot of legal issues there, right? That's enough for an entire giant law firm to be handling. And you got to wonder whether eventually that has some impact on his political standing. So far, not so much. He's doing pretty well among Republicans. But at some point, do Republicans look all this, especially if there's another indictment or another two indictments, and say, okay, like the guy, wish he would be president, but it's just too much. So let's see if there's somebody else we can have. We'll see. We'll see. It's hard to say. Doesn't help him with independents and moderates, who he does need in a general election. And so I think that's a real concern for a lot of Republicans who don't want to lose yet another election next year.
And yet we see the CNN poll that came out most recently showing the former president well ahead of the field of former Vice President Pence, I think to the surprise of many, was in the top three. Ron DeSantis, of course, the Florida governor, in the runner-up position at this point. And then we've had Chris Christie, others who've joined the race. Is it your sense that they're joining the race in case former President Trump is disqualified legally, and so that would catapult them into being competitive?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that at least for some of them, the calculation has to be that Trump will self-destruct, and then suddenly there'll be an open field in front of them, and we'll see who manages to race down the field, and anything can go at that point. I mean, I don't think any of these candidates so far has shown that they are able or willing at this point to even take Trump down, right? That they don't seem at this point to have the capacity to beat him. What they're banking on is that he beats himself, that he in fact implodes in some way or another because of the legal issues, because of his own, whatever, and they'll be there to pick up the pieces, which is why they're trying not to offend his base, trying not to offend his supporters by attacking him too aggressively, with the exception of Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson. Most of them are taking a pretty gingerly approach to him at this point.
And Chris Christie, way down at the bottom. I don't know that Asa Hutchinson even registered by name in that CNN poll. So to this point, that hasn't connected with Republican or Republican-leaning voters. This issue was raised a lot, and some people don't like to have it talked about. But when you look at polls, the unfavorables on both the current and former president are high. And we had the most unpopular matchup in the last election. There's the potential to have an unpopular matchup again. And what does that bode if it is Biden and Trump a second time? What does that mean for possible turnout, for people being focused on the election? What is the potential collateral effect of that?
Yeah. I mean, for one thing, let's start with the idea that we are in such a polarized time that it's been years since we had a leader that we could agree on outside of our partisan lenses, right? If you have to go back to Bush 43's first term to find any president who had a sustained period of popularity over 50%. Bush didn't register above 50% for his entire second term. Obama had some decent numbers at the very beginning, some decent numbers for a few weeks after Osama bin Laden was killed, and some decent numbers at the very end when he was leaving office and people were kind of freaking out about Trump. But beyond that, he didn't have ratings over 50% for much of his presidency either. Trump, not a single day of his presidency was over 50%. And Biden, basically since the summer of his first year, has been under 50% and doesn't seem to be moving up. So you're right. I think we are, first of all, in a period where we are just very divided. We are either for this camp or that camp, and nothing is going to move us. We're not, there were times when Reagan or Clinton or JFK or Nixon or whoever were like, 60, 70% approval rating, even among people from the other party. We're just not in that kind of an environment anymore. It's not possible. So what the Biden people look at that and say, okay, yeah, we're not doing that great. We're underwater and everything, but we don't have to be 60%. We just have to be better than the other guy. It's the old joke, right? The bear is over there. I don't have to outrace the bear. I only have to outrace you. So they look at Trump and say, we just have to be, better than him. And he's looking pretty bad. So there you go. But it's not a very encouraging sign for democracy when the goal is to basically get the bare minimum possible to win the election, because then you're going to be governing without much of a mandate, even if you do win.
I want to take advantage of your 4 years that you spent in Moscow, in your sense of Vladimir Putin and Russia with the counteroffensive that's been launched by Ukraine, and your thoughts about the likelihood that Russia will just continue to suffer the kinds of casualties that the military has, and that the country will continue to support this. I mean, Russians will continue to support this.
Yeah, a recent poll by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs showed that more Russians believe today that they are successful in Ukraine than believed even a few months ago. So they are being spoon-fed, misinformation on state TV, and a lot of them are either buying it or not willing to accept that the truth is something other than that. So, look, I think that as long as Vladimir Putin is in power, this war is going to be going on. I don't see him backing off. It's very hard to imagine him saying, okay, didn't work out, I'm pulling out. Just, it's not in his nature. And we've never seen any example of him doing that. And if you think about bad wars, history of bad wars in the last century, they were all ended by somebody other than the person who started them, right? In other words, Truman didn't stop Korea, Ike did. LBJ didn't stop Vietnam, Nixon did. Brezhnev didn't stop Afghanistan in the Soviet times, Gorbachev did. You can say, Bush in Iraq and Obama and Afghanistan with Biden and so forth. So the person who starts the war, even if it goes badly, I think has a structural disincentive to say, hey, didn't work out, too bad, I'm leaving. They just don't want to admit it. So the question is, how long will Putin be in power? And at the moment, he looks pretty strong. There are rumbles among Russian friends of mine, journalists who know better there than I do, saying that, there are indications that something might happen someday, but I wouldn't bet on it. He's a very strong figure there, and he's got the place pretty wired after 20 years in power.
All right. Before we take questions from viewers, I also wanted to ask you about a big challenge for the Biden administration on the push to reduce fossil fuels, because there are all these efforts through automobile standards, move to all electric vehicles, moving towards home appliances being electric. At the same time, we have a creaky electric infrastructure with power shortages in places like Texas and California that we've been dealing with. We've been dealing with volatile costs for energy, and the reality that we're going to be using fossil fuels for a number of years to come as we make this transition. So what are the biggest challenges you're seeing in the administration trying to respond to this climate emergency and the huge impacts that that's having, but the challenges with the infrastructure matching up with where they're trying to get us?
Yeah. Of course, he has passed, of course, the infrastructure, the $1 trillion infrastructure package of last year. At the same time, the Inflation Reduction Act had hundreds of billions of dollars in there for clean energy projects. And I think that's going to be the real test. He's not going to get more legislation through this Congress. Let's just face it. There's nothing that a Democratic president's going to get through a Republican House about climate or clean energy at this point. In fact, he had to fight a defensive battle to keep Speaker McCarthy and the Republicans from taking some of the clean energy projects that were approved last year out of the budget. He managed to defend them successfully. They're all still there. But the challenge for him in these next 2 years is to implement, or at least a year and a half, and then we'll see if there's a second term, is to implement what he's already done and to do it in a smart way, as you rightly say, to attack the issues where they need to be and to find the balance between, making sure that we are we have ample energy supplies as we try to transition to the future that he sees. I'm not an expert on this subject, but I think that's one of the absolute biggest challenges he has going forward in the next year. And you've got Mitch Landrieu working on that with the infrastructure. At the same time, you have the environmental team that he's got working on the energy side.
Also, you probably heard just about an hour before we started this program, on a party line vote, the House censured Adam Schiff, the Los Angeles area Democratic congressman, and the censure resolution essentially saying that the congressman had misled in his investigations into the former president, alleging that there was collusion between the former president and the Russian government during his campaign. Does this have any effect at all, or is the only effect with Republican voters?
My guess is in today's day and age, maybe in the past, a censure was a genuine source of political shame or what have you. I think today, I'm given that it's a partisan thing, I bet it's a badge of honor for Adam Schiff, and he'll use it in the Senate campaign. See, I'm so disliked by the Republicans. You got to vote for me because I'm the one who gets them all riled up or whatever. I mean, that's that. My guess is, I don't know that might be his.
I was looking to see if he put out a fundraising message yet, because as you say, for him, a badge of honor as he runs for the U.S. Senate from California. But I haven't seen it yet. But
there aren't that many,
for him, there's no downside.
Right, because we don't actually have competitive districts or even states as many anymore, right? Because we are either blue or red. And so being, chided by the other side, is just taken as that much more political gamesmanship rather than a serious effort at accountability on ethics or things like that there used to be.
Let's go to viewers in our audience. Thank you so much. Rachel in Seminole, Florida asks, what are your thoughts about the Hunter Biden plea deal?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, especially coming just 2 weeks after the Trump indictment. Republicans, of course, automatically say, look, this is obviously a sweetheart deal, slap on the wrist. Look what he got versus what Trump got. The facts, of course, are radically different between what has been accused and what he's now admitting to Hunter Biden versus what has been alleged about Donald Trump. And they're not comparable in any meaningful way. And it's also worth remembering that the charges that are being brought against Hunter Biden and the plea deal that's been negotiated are brought by and negotiated by Trump's own appointed U.S. attorney. This is the U.S. attorney who was appointed by Bill Barr during the Trump administration to investigate Hunter Biden. The Biden people, rather than replace him, decided to keep him on so that nobody could say that they were meddling with this. And David Weiss, who's that U.S. attorney, told Congress just a few days ago that he had the ultimate authority to make this decision. So this is a Trump appointee who decided what was the appropriate resolution for Hunter Biden's legal issues. Now, that doesn't mean the issue is going to go away. Congress, particularly the Republicans in the House, are going to continue investigating and looking for examples of corruption or influence peddling or what have you. So far, they haven't really come up with anything all that definitive, but it's become sort of a totemic kind of thing for people in conservative media and so forth. You simply say Hunter Biden, they all say, but so far nobody's actually alleged anything done by Joe Biden. Every president, it seems, has some issue with a son or a daughter or a brother or sister or parent or whatever that embarrasses them and gets them in trouble. The real question is, do we have any evidence that President Biden did something wrong? And so far there's some whispers and so forth, but nothing concrete.
Well, and there is, I think, a sense that Hunter Biden has, throughout his life, sort of tried to trade on his father's positions, and that maybe President Biden could have been more assertive along the way in telling him to knock that off. I'm not talking specifically about in criminal malfeasance, but just that he could have been more directive with his son.
I think it's exactly right. If you talk to Democrats privately, that's what they'll say. They're not going to deny that Hunter Biden traded off of his name. His last name is Biden. Why did he get some of these jobs or contracts? At least some of them clearly had some relationship to who his father was. And they wish he hadn't done. They wish that his father had stepped in, just as you said. It's a harder family situation because of Hunter Biden's obvious issues with addiction and alcoholism. I mean, he has, if you read his book, his memoir that came out in 2021, he was just in a cycle of cocaine binge after cocaine binge, and you can see why his father finds it difficult probably to have that kind of a conversation with him. But you're right, it's been a vulnerability for President Biden. Not one that other Democrats are happy about, because it takes away a little of the edge when they are talking about the other side's issues. If the other side can simply say, well, what about Hunter Biden?
Jim in Salem, Oregon asks, which GOP candidate would be the greatest threat to Biden?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think you can make the argument that obviously a younger Republican can make the contrast more sharply than, say, Trump could in terms of new generation, right? If age really is a concern among a lot of voters, does a Ron DeSantis, age 44, bring that to the table? But he hasn't so far impressed other Republicans. And if you can't impress your own party, are you going to be able to impress the independents you need? This is what these next 5 months are going to be about. They're going to be about testing who actually can transcend the hype and actually build some sort of a political coalition. At the moment, none of them looks all that strong. But it also could be that like with Trump, waiting to see him self-destruct, whoever is a Republican nominee is there not only hitting Biden, but waiting for Biden to self-destruct if for some reason he does something bad or makes a mistake in the fall of 2024.
Annie asks, will Chris Christie's candidacy make a difference? He's not, as we just talked about that CNN poll, he wasn't registering much, but Annie's question may really be with a candidate directly taking on Trump and criticizing him so outspokenly, whether that might have an effect and somehow weaken Trump.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, look, the question is whether Chris Christie gets on that debate stage, given the requirements that the party has set for how you qualify, right? If Chris Christie's on that stage and he's going after Trump, he may be the only one up there doing it. That'll be a real contrast to the Mike Pences and the Nikki Haley's and the Ron DeSantis who are trying to have it a little bit both ways in some ways. And if Christie goes at him as frontally as he has, in the run up to these debates, that will be a much more vigorous contest at some point. Doesn't mean he's going to beat Trump, but he could remind Republicans of the things that they have to worry about when it comes to Trump, and that could damage Trump or not. We don't know. Remember, Chris Christie pretty effectively, took the wind out of Marco Rubio's sails in 2016 at a debate. We'll see whether he has the ability to do that to Trump. He's the one guy in the race, I think, who has the sort of same pugilistic instincts that Trump does and doesn't shy away from, punching and counterpunching. And the rest of them, I don't know how much that really suits their instincts or their natural, their nature.
Mark asks, will Cornel West running as a candidate with the People's Party or the potential that Joe Manchin would enter the race, third party or independent, what effect could that have on 2024?
Look, if you're Joe Biden, you don't want any distractions out there. You don't want anybody else offering any other options. You want it to be you versus Donald Trump, in other words, which is the matchup we think is happening at the moment. Because you want to be able to say that if you don't vote for me, this is what you get. And there's no way out. There's no way out by saying you can vote for some third party or somebody else who allows you to say, I can't vote for Trump, but I'm not going to vote for Biden. And look, are they going to get any traction in a third party way? I mean, there's not much history of a third party candidate actually winning, obviously, but they can make a difference. Look what happened. Even a small percentage for Ralph Nader, for instance, in Florida in 2000, you can argue, may have tipped the balance between Al Gore and George W. Bush. It doesn't have to be a lot of votes if it's in the right states and the right number to change an outcome. And so I think that's why the Biden people are a little bit worried about any other candidates getting in there, because they just don't want there to be a distraction.
We have another question. This one, Carol asks, what can be done to improve civility in our political discourse?
That is the question of the day, right? And it's a huge one. And I'm not sure I know the answer. As a journalist, I observe and diagnose the issues. I don't necessarily cure them, but I think our issue with civility, I mean, it's not that we haven't had uncivil times before, right? But the advent of technology has made it so much more, volcanic than it's ever been. Social media and endless, partisan media, all of that encourages the loudest and the angriest voices, and it makes it harder for those who want to be civil to get into the picture, to get into the debate. Look at Asa Hutchinson, right? Asa Hutchinson, the former governor of Arkansas, he's as civil a guy as I've ever met. I've known him for 25 years. He was one of the managers of the Clinton impeachment for the Republicans, conservative guy. He's not some shrinking violet Republican, but he believes in civility, and he's a very old school Republican in that sense. And because of that, it makes it even that much harder for a guy like that to break through. We don't value that. We don't reward that these days as a political system, whether it be the media, whether it be social media, whether it be the voters. We like to say, well, gosh, our politicians are letting us down. Well, remember who sent them there. I mean, they're getting there because we're the ones who reward the most uncivil, politicians out there.
We had another question, this from Janet, who asks, how important will abortion rights be as an issue in the 2024 presidential race?
Well, that's a really good question. If you ask Democrats, they think it'll be super important and they would like to make it important. If you ask the Biden team, they think so too, but they've got a candidate, that is the president, who is sort of still kind of reluctant to talk about it. It's not in his wheelhouse. He feels uncomfortable about it. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, has been much more vocal, much more willing to get out there and make that a big issue. And I think that's what they're going to use her for that next year. One of the big questions is how many states will have these referenda, yes or no, up or down vote. Do you support abortion rights or not in the Constitution or what have you? Because when you have those ballots, have those referenda on the ballots, we've seen the pro-abortion rights side comes out and votes for it, right? Even in a conservative state like Kansas. It hasn't always necessarily helped every candidate just because the candidate is for abortion rights, right? A lot of the candidates who are most vocal for abortion rights are in blue districts already doing pretty well. The question is whether they can for Democrats, can they transfer some districts that otherwise wouldn't be blue if they talk about the abortion issue? And I think that's a concern for Republicans who think maybe they may be endangering themselves by going too far with some of the laws some of these states have passed.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if they're going to be so gung-ho with some of these measures because of I think for them, the unexpected voter response that they've gotten even in reliably Republican states.
Right. And yet the Republican conversation right now in the presidential primary is how far to the right can you go on abortion? Because you see DeSantis and Pence in particular attacking Trump for being too squishy when it comes to abortion. Trump, of course, is the one who gave the anti-abortion movement 3 justices on the Supreme Court who helped end Roe v. Wade. So he's got a pretty good record, you can argue, in terms of getting rid of abortion rights, if that's your position. But he has been more cautious in advocating some of these laws that have come out lately saying, well, that may be going too far. And so you're seeing him being attacked from the right when it comes to DeSantis and Pence on that. We'll see how that plays out in their primary.
Peter in Santa Monica asks, will President Biden keep Kamala Harris on the ticket? Is she ready to be president?
I answer the first is yes. There's no sign that he would do anything to change the ticket, even though there obviously are some Democrats who would like that. It comes up every 4 years, every reelection. They always speculate about whether a president might dump a vice president, but nobody's done it successfully since FDR. The one time it's been tried since then was Gerald Ford, who dumped Nelson Rockefeller and put Bob Dole on his ticket, didn't save him. And I think that in this case, like, Biden doesn't want to say that the first choice he made as a presidential candidate was a wrong one. A. B, it would offend a large constituency an important constituency within the Democratic Party if you were to dump her. And B and C, I don't know who you would put on there who would necessarily make a difference. Like what votes would you get in return for some theoretical new candidate that would outweigh the votes you might lose by alienating people who would be upset at you for taking her off the ticket. So I don't think that's on the table for them.
I think there is the perception among some that President Biden, as candidate Biden, had to really be talked into because of some of the rancor during the primary race, having her as his running mate. Is that accurate?
Well, I think that's true, and it's been reported. I think it's true that Jill Biden, the first lady, was against the choice, or at least reluctant to have her have Kamala Harris on the ticket, because she very much resented that debate moment when Kamala Harris, attacked Joe Biden over race and busing.
Busing, wasn't it? That yeah,
it was about busing basically when he had made the. And so I think that there's still some raw feelings there about that. Not so much probably with Joe Biden. He's a guy who moves on stuff like that. But some of the people around him certainly remember that. But right now, they know it's in their interest to make Kamala Harris as successful a vice president as they can, because there are a lot of doubts about her, like even among fellow Democrats, especially among fellow Democrats who don't think she is helping out right now and don't want her as their candidate if for some reason Joe Biden didn't run. So it's up to the Joe Biden White House to make her a more successful vice president, because they don't want her to be a vulnerability next year. You're already hearing Republicans say, look, this president is so old. If you vote for him, you're effectively voting for Kamala Harris to be president. They don't want that to be a successful line. So they need to make her a more successful vice president.
Richard asks, what role will Liz Cheney play in politics in coming years? And we have just a couple minutes for quick answer on that.
That's a good question. Look, if she thought that she could do something by running for president or something like that, she would do it. She hasn't made any noises about that lately. I think that she thinks that, it wouldn't make a difference if she were to throw her hat in the ring. And it's not clear where she could go from here. I mean, there's not a lot of options for her. Obviously, Wyoming doesn't want her. They made that very clear in the last election. I can't imagine a Republican president putting her in the cabinet right now because she's so radioactive among the Trump part of the party, which is not going to go away even if they don't nominate Trump again. But she would like to have a voice. She would like to make her principles clear and to speak out. And she's writing a book, I think, right now that I think will come out before the election, in which she will argue to Republicans that it's time to stand up for the principles that they used to have and not to be enthralled to a guy that she sees as a violator of the Constitution, who doesn't believe in democracy.
Peter, in closing, I just want to ask you to just share a final thought and maybe in some way focused on the work that you do with the New York Times and why it is so important for us to have a window into a presidency and to better understand what happens in a White House administration.
Well, look, I think that we still today, and I know that it's not a popular thought, but we still today have a vigorous, important, and vital free press. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I know that everybody gets mad at, the media, this and that. First of all, keep in mind the media isn't a monolith. There's a lot of different types of media. There's beat reporters, there are columnists, there are opinion writers, there are, cable hosts. So a lot of different kinds of journalists. But and we don't do a good job, that is journalists, we don't do a good job of defining our differences so that our viewers and readers understand the different roles that we have, the different responsibilities. So we have failed, I think, in doing a good job of delineating those lines. But broadly speaking, it's still, we are still lucky, I think, to have people question those in power, to have people out there bringing facts to light that otherwise would not be known. And we see around the world fewer and fewer places where that's possible. Tomorrow, we're going to host Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, at the White House. President Biden will have him there for a state visit. If you look at what is being done to the media and to dissent in India, which is the world's largest democracy, it's a reminder of how important it is to preserve that here. So I know that, President Trump liked to say, enemies of the people, fake news. The truth is, most reporters, most people I know in the media are trying to get the story right, trying to get facts right, trying to help readers and viewers understand what's going on in the best, most professional way they can. Do we fail? Absolutely. We make mistakes? Yes, we do. Should we correct them? Yes. Should we be thinking about how to do what we do better? Absolutely. But we are lucky, I think, still to have a vibrant and vigorous free press in this country.
Theo Baker's father, Peter, thank you very much for being with us. It's been a tremendous conversation, and we all appreciate the work that you're doing, how you've talked about the challenges in doing that work, how the administrations are so tremendously different from each other, and the kind of discipline that you bring to your outstanding work. Peter, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all again. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much. Peter Baker, Chief White House Correspondent for the New York Times. I also want to remind you, as we heard from Janice and David earlier, 2 programs next week. I will be back with you on Tuesday with former Los Angeles County Supervisor and former LA City Councilman Zev Yaroslavsky to talk about his career in politics, his career in service, and his new memoir that he's written, which is just a tremendous read. I know the book is a little tough to get right now, but it's been in such demand. But we're going to talk with him about it next Tuesday at 5 o'clock Pacific, 8 o'clock Eastern. And it'll be of great interest, I think, to those of you living elsewhere outside of Los Angeles County as well, because so many of the issues that he deals with are ones that have been significant public matters all across the United States. So I'll be in conversation with Zev on Tuesday night. Then a week from tonight, next Wednesday, 5 p.m. Pacific, the Atlantic's and CNN's Ron Brownstein, who is such a frequent guest on America at a Crossroads, always with fascinating analysis. He'll be talking with my good friend, LA Times Pulitzer Prize winning columnist Pat Morrison. It'll be an outstanding conversation. That's next Wednesday night, 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. And please support these important programs by visiting the websites of either Jews United for Democracy and Justice or Community Advocates, Inc. These nonprofit organizations collaborate to put on these very important weekly programs. So please support their efforts with your tax-deductible contribution. Thank you for joining us, and have a terrific rest of your evening.